Bolsito de Dior cuando sale y un blin blineo que hace que pite el detector de metales. El terror de las yales, un blon y botella y se van todos los males. Cayó la noche, la nena me dijo que no tose, pues la puse a fumar.
Welcome to God is Open. I am your host, Christopher Fisher. Today on God is Open, we're just going to do a quick reading comprehension lesson. Like every Monday, I like to do interesting things with my kids. And so today on in real life, not on God is Open, I took them through some of the writings of Borges. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but he's a famous South American author. Very good work that he goes through, and very difficult writing to comprehend and understand. And so the level of reading comprehension that you have to bring to his work is on this escalated level. So I'm taking my kids through these stories and talking to them about meaning and word choice and phrasing and the concepts that are being pulled out of these stories. And a lot of times the actual meaning of a story is not explicit within the story itself. And so I had each of my children, my four oldest, pick individual stories to read through and then give little presentations on. And my daughter, she saw there was a short story on toenails and she picked it thinking it would be like cute, but again, it's at this higher contemplation level, just the way that it's worded. So she didn't know that it's very short, but it's incredibly complicated. I don't think she got it on her first reading. And so when we're looking at literature, we have to try to figure out what's going on, who's talking, why are they talking, why are the phrases worded in such a way that they are, what kind of information is being communicated to the listener, to the reader. Those types of concepts should be on our mind. Why is it that in one of these stories, he's making up a story, he can make up anything he wants, and he at the end says, well, perhaps this is the case in this other place and other time. Why doesn't he tell us something definitive? What's his purpose in how he phrases? So we're going to just cover this short story, short little essay, Toenails, found within this book. He says, gentle socks pamper them by day, and shoes cobbled of leather fortify them, but my toes hardly notice. All they're interested in is turning out toenails, semi-transparent, flexible sheets of horn-like material. As a defense against whom? Brutish, distrustful. As only they can be, my toes labor ceaselessly at manufacturing that frail armament. They turn their backs on the universe and its ecstasies in order to spin out endlessly those 10 pointless projectile heads, which are cut away time and time again by sudden snips of a solang, by a toenail cutter. By the 19th twilight day of their prenatal confinement, my toes had cranked up that extraordinary factory, and when I am tucked away in Recoleta, in an ash-colored house, bedecked with dry flowers and amulets, they will still be at their stubborn work until corruption at last slows them, and the beard upon my cheeks. And so this is very interesting. This is a short story, and it's titled Toenails, and it describes toenails, but it's actually not about toenails. I asked my daughter, it said, is this a story about toenails? It's titled right there, Toenails. And she said, yes. I said, no, that's incorrect. There are incorrect readings of these stories. And to take this as a story about toenails is missing the point that this story is trying to communicate to the audience. This really could have been about anything. It could have been about beards. It could have been about waterfalls. It could have been about mindless animals going about their daily habits. Maybe you have a cat. It talks about the cat's habits in conjunction with the owner, and then the owner perishes at the end, and the cat keeps going about its normal daily activities. It could have been about anything. So this is fundamentally not a story about toenails. And we could figure out what the author is trying to communicate by just looking at the phrasing within the story. Gentle socks pamper them by day, and shoes cobbled of leather fortify them. He's saying our toes are protected and pampered and put in this situation in which they don't have to fear from the outside. What are toenails for but to protect the feet? But we got shoes to do that. We got socks to do that. We don't actually need our toenails. But my toes hardly notice. Our toes are indifferent. They'll just continue functioning as normal without regard to the outside world. That's what he's saying. They're impervious to this feedback of what reality is reflecting. All they're interested in is turning out toenails. He's personifying our toes. Our toes have interests. And he's just describing that there's this natural biological function that keeps happening regardless of there's no feedback from the outside to tell them, to give them a new direction, a new course. Semi-transparent, flexible sheets of horn-like material as a defense against whom? He's criticizing our toenails. We don't need them anymore. We got socks and shoes. They're brutish, distrustful as only they can be. My toes labor ceaselessly at manufacturing that frail armament. He has to go through the process of cutting his toenails endlessly, even though he doesn't need them growing to the extent that they do, because he goes around in socks and shoes. This is a useless function within his feet. They turn their backs on the universe and the ecstasies in order to spin out endlessly those 10 pointless projectile heads. Again, he's talking about the indifference of our bodily functions, of biology, of the world around us, the indifference and the mindlessness, the mindless goals that these things pursue without regard to the world. He's saying there's good things in this world. There's ecstasies that could be focused on, but it does something repetitive, it does something unnecessary, it does something ultimately pointless. He says, endlessly, those 10 pointless projectile heads, which are cut away time and time again by sudden snips of my toenail clipper. He has to go through and use his effort to stop this function from happening. By the 19th twilight day of their prenatal confinement, he's comparing our toenails here to prenatal babies. The babies are in the womb, they're protected, they're confined, and that's the image he's drawing and comparing to the toenails as they are in our shoes, as they are protected in our socks. My toes had cranked up that extraordinary factory. They kept growing and they grew even faster, even though they are protected. And when I am tucked away in Recoleta, in an ash-colored house bedecked with dry flowers and amulets, they will still be at their stubborn work. He's saying, I will die, and my toes will go on growing, until corruption at least slows them. And the beard upon my cheeks. So there's this false sense that when we die, our toenails and nails keep growing and our hair keeps growing, but really the skin's withering away. But that's besides the point. His illustration is that all these mindless biological functions keep going on regardless of us. They're indifferent to our suffering. They're indifferent to our lives. He's saying here, this is ultimately not a story about toenails whatsoever. It's a story about the indifference of natural processes when compared to our very personal lives. The carelessness of the universe. That's what this story is about. And so I thought this would be a very good illustration of reading comprehension and understanding genre, understanding the points of what stories are trying to communicate to their audience. And sometimes, the story is not about what the story is about. The story is about something else entirely. And the principles can be generalized. You need to know what you're reading. You need to be able to dissect the language being used, the wording, why it's used in the way that it is used. And then that way you're going to be able to understand the story. Not all stories are straightforward. And there is room for disagreement, but yes, there are still going to be wrong answers. And when I asked my daughter if this is a story about toenails, and she said yes, that in fact is a wrong answer. It's ultimately not about toenails. It's about the indifference of natural processes to our lives, which are very important. A lot of these stories are about life and death and contemplation of our place in the universe. There's some Calvinistic concepts or deterministic or fatalistic concepts within these stories. Very interesting to think through them and read as illustrations. So a lot of these stories are worth reading through, showing your kids, talking to your kids about how these stories function, what they're about, why things are worded as they're worded, and just for a general reflection on what life is like. And so I highly recommend this author, and I highly recommend for this for numerous purposes, for philosophical purposes, for reading comprehension purposes, and for just increasing your cultural vocabulary, understanding literature, especially from a South American perspective. But that's just what I want to talk about today: reading comprehension and Borges. I don't know if I'm saying the guy's name right, but very good book. All right. Thanks for listening. Comments, questions, put that down below, or start a thread on the God is Open Facebook page.